Okay, come. Good morning, everybody. And let's get rolling over here as we begin. We begin Parshat Noach. I also would like to do a little bit on Parshat Breishit to address something that I did over Shabbos. So those who were here on Shabbos, you'll have a little bit of a review. Those who weren't here on Shabbos, you'll be able to have a first time.
We would love to have a review.
I'm sorry?
We would love to have a review.
Okay.
To grasp everything.
Okay. So, hi Amy, good morning. So, we dealt, on Shabbos, I dealt with what one of the guys called, said, Rabbi, thanks for dealing with the elephant in the room. And the elephant in the room is the age of the universe, which we begin with Breishit, and we hear about 6 days of creation, and we are in the year 5775. Haba Aleina Latova, should be a good year for all of us. And science tells us that the universe is approximately 14, 15, 16 billion years old. So how do we understand that apparent contradiction? So I dealt with that on Shabbos, and a lot of people have asked me to write it up, and I thought maybe we'd do part of that today also. That way I'll just tell them, go to YouTube, and you can watch it yourself. Okay? So we will double back to that, right? Being this is our first of this year, we'll start with Noach, but then I do want to double back to Breishit. Very often I do want to double back and we end up getting very involved in what we're doing. Yeah. But today I will make a truly concerted effort to, in fact, double back.
Maybe you'll start with Breishit. No? Okay. That's okay. Whatever you want to do.
Would that be a preference to start with that? Okay. So let's start with that. Okay. We can start with that. Okay. Breishit. In the beginning, right, so if you look, turn to page 2. It's pretty simple. And we have a total of 31 psukim, 2 through 8, which tell us about the creation of the world. The creation of the world was over the course of 6 days. Ramban says explicitly that these 6 days were 24-hour days, which seems to dispel the answer that is often given, that the 6 days of creation might have spanned billions of years. Now,
and how does he conclude that they were 24-hour days?
Well, I don't think he says. He says if we're talking about a yom, then the understanding is as a yom, as a day is understood in general. That's how it means. That's what it means over there. Unless, well, we're going to see there are different ways of looking at it. Okay, so this past Shabbos, we went through 3 different approaches to understanding the age of the universe from a Torah perspective, accepting that we're in the year 5775, and also giving credence to science, which tells us that when they scientifically measure the age of the world, the universe, we're talking about 14, 15, 16 billion years.
And that's from the Big Bang, right?
Okay, correct.
Who knows what was before the Big Bang?
Okay, so first, well, before the Big Bang, there was nothing that they could measure.
Right.
Yeah. Okay, so first of all, I think it's important to realize that there are different ways of arriving at truth. If we're looking at, Marta, is a bit of a review from Shabbos, okay? If we're looking at a very, very beautiful home, and we wonder, how was this home built? What went into the structure? What went into the foundation? What went into this? I just see the roof. I see the house. I see beautifully painted walls. I want to know what went into the kishkas. What went into the inside, the foundation? What went into this home? So there are two ways that I could ascertain. I can start to drill into the holes, into the walls, send in different probes, and see what's in there. I could drill down, send down a probe to the foundation, and I can extract evidence. I can extract evidence from this house and understand what went into this house. And I can reconstruct how this was built, how old it must be. I can reconstruct all of that. Or I can go to City Hall and I can pull out the plan. And I'll know exactly how it was built, what went into it. One is working my way backwards with my evidence and my acumen and my investigation and doing this forensic understanding of what happened in the past. Or I can pull the blueprints and know how it was built. Eventually...
Well, you know how it was planned to be built.
Correct. Now, eventually, there will be a complete meeting of Torah and science. When science is drawing the proper conclusions, and the scientific study is forever going ahead, taking a step back, and then going further ahead, but progressing at a very, very impressive rate, that truth will eventually align with Torah, because Torah is God telling us what went in, what happened. Now let's also keep in mind that the Torah is not necessarily telling us about the physical world, because that's not the purpose of the Torah. The purpose of the Torah is Torat Chaim, a guide of life, a guide to make us spiritual, godly people. So very often it's not, the nitty-gritty is not important. That's not the issue that's at hand. But there will ultimately be a complete convergence of Torah and science. And I gave two examples on Shabbos about how in our lifetime we have seen two wonderful examples of that. One example is the Gemara speaks about the length of the lunar month. And it breaks it down to chalakim, hours and chalakim. A chalak means a portion. We divide the hour into 1,080 portions, which means we're dividing every minute into 18 portions. So every chalak is down to about 3.3 seconds or so. That's what it comes out to. And we have from the Gemara, in the Rambam, in the Shulchan Aruch, in the Code of Jewish Law, we have the length, the duration of the lunar month, down to within 3 seconds.
It's okay.
Right? And it's 29 and a half, and then plus fractions of a day. And that's what we have from the Gemara. Without any telescopes, without the astronomy that we have today. In the 1970s, I think it was the Hubble, I'm not sure, right? The NASA, in 1973, I think it was, came up with their definitive length, duration of the lunar month from the time the moon reappears. How long is the lunar month? And they came basically with a number that was within 1/10,000th of the Gemara's number. When the scientist who was in charge was told the Jews have had that number for thousands of years, his response was lucky guess. Right? And as I said on Shabbos, if I can make such lucky guesses on the stock market, I would be a very wealthy person who would not need to take any salary. I still do what I'm doing every day, but I would not need to ask the shul for a salary.
So he was a foolish scientist.
Okay. But, so there are two different ways to arrive at that calculation. Either we have our Torah Shebaal Peh, which is God revealing to us and are passing it down through the generations, and it's in the Talmud. Or we can work backwards and reach that number. Another example is that it seems a poll was taken in the late 1950s amongst the scientists about the age of the universe, and the majority said, what do you mean the age of the universe? The universe has always been here. The universe has always existed. And anything that would smack of Breishit, in the beginning, creation, that is outdated. You know, that's the stuff that you have in the hotel room. When you open the drawer there, you have this very nice little Gideon's Bible over there. That's where they talk about that stuff. But that's not reality. That's not truth. Of course, then science reached the point where they hear the background noise of the Big Bang and this ever-expanding universe, and science reaches the conclusion that there was a beginning. Now, everyone in science will say there was a beginning. There was what we call a Big Bang.
Stephen Hawking?
There was a beginning. Now, it's fascinating. Ramban, Nachmanides, right, about the 12th or 11th century, writes on Breishit, he writes that it all started with a speck. And from that, he says, Shamayim va'aretz, all the heavens and earth, all came about. He also says something else that's a fantastic notion, which now I don't say we understand it, but now we say that is, we agree with that. That notion is that the whole idea of time only began once there was matter. Before there was matter, there was no concept, there was no realm, not no concept, there was no existence of time. And Ramban says it's only when there is mashahu sheyitpos, if there's something that it could take hold of, that it could grab onto, that's when time begins. So again, over there, science went from always existing to a Breishit. Two examples of a convergence of Torah and science. But what do we do when it comes to the age of the universe? How do we bridge a gap of 16,005,775, which is just a rounding error when it comes to 16 billion? How do we bridge that gap? How do Torah-believing people who live in this world and accept science as a faltering but constantly zeroing in on truth, that science is such a study, how do we resolve that? Amy, was it?
What I wanted to know is, so what you believe is the Big Bang happened, and that also led to Breishit.
Yes. Yes. In other words,
then can it all work?
let's see. Yes, I believe it can, but we do have a disparity in the years.
The dinosaurs.
Yeah, dinosaurs. Yes. Okay.
Is it sort of like the way we measure things? Some societies use metric systems, some use splits, inches. I mean, what's the length of a year? What composes a year?
Okay.
So maybe that is one of the issues.
Okay.
That we're talking apples and oranges, really.
To a degree. Let's begin. When we're talking about 5,775 years, at what point did we click and go from 74 to 75? On which day? On Rosh Hashanah. On Rosh Hashanah, we went from 5774 to 5775. Rosh Hashanah is the anniversary of the creation of Adam, mankind, not the world. It is day 6. From day 6 and on, clearly a day is a day and a year is a year. What happened until that point? Now, I mentioned before, Ramban says they were all 24-hour days, but we will examine that a little bit further. How are we going to understand those 6 days? 3 different approaches that I like to share with you. Approach number 1 is that, which is not my favorite, but let me put it out there. Approach number 1 is Adam and Eve. Were they newborn infants or were they adults when they were created? Adults. The animals, newborn animals or adults? Adults. The trees in the garden, adults. How do we know they were adults? Prove it to me.
Fruit bearing.
Fruit bearing. Not that fruit bearing, but fruit upon them. They had right. They were bearing their fruits. Not that they would bear. They were. It was an adult world. Now, we can measure the age of a tree by the rings in the tree, right? If one were to bore a hole into one of those trees and measure the age of the tree, what would it tell you?
It's been there for a long time.
Right? That tree would be 100, 200, 300, 1,000 years old. Right? How old was it?
Brand new.
Brand new. A moment.
Not my favorite explanation
Okay?
Yeah.
Now, so far I'm fine with it. The problem that I have is, so now let's go to the earth. The earth is going to be a mature earth. What is found in a mature earth? Different levels of rock formation with fossilized remains in between those different levels of rock formation. So therefore, right, all of these things, the dinosaur bones, they're all found there in this mature world that was created. So when you date that tree, it says 700 years old. How old is it? Brand new. When you date that earth, it will read 16 billion years old. How old is it? 5775 to this day. At that point, how old was it? Brand new. We say in Tehillim, the heavens speak of Hashem's glory. This world is meant to arouse a tremendous degree of awe in us. And the more we see about this world, this universe, the more awe-inspiring it is. And the chance of our being here, not being too cold, not being too... all that goes into earth being habitable, and our being here, sophisticated, sitting here and discussing this, being videotaped, the chances of this are 1 in, send zeros from here to the moon. That's the chances of it happening. This universe is awe-inspiring. It is amazing. That's on the macro level. On a micro level, you look at one cell, and then then you enlarge that cell to 1,000 times, 10,000 times, 100,000 times the size. And you see that in every single cell there is this factory that is going on, that is producing energy and transporting everything all about, right? And storing. Right? We talk about storage nowadays. Storing in the nucleus of that cell, in the DNA there, all of the information, not just about that skin cell, but all the information of every single cell in the body. Right? It is just astounding, and that is all stored. We make a big deal now. We get our 128 gigabytes, right? Right? That's in the nucleus. I mean, the world on a macro, on a micro level, is just. You couldn't make these things up. It is just beyond. And you look at the plethora of life around us, right? And this ridiculous little fly. Right? If we can make a fighter jet that could like the fly goes around, amazing. This world is just beyond our comprehension. It's beyond belief. The world is meant to inspire belief in God, not to present challenges of, the fossils are there because it's an old world, and therefore it's there to confuse us, to challenge us. That is why this approach is not one of my personal favorites, but everyone can choose that which speaks to them.
Sorry, Rabbi. So it only challenges us if we accept this as the Word of God. Okay. If you make that presumption, okay, or you say that that's the truth, then you have a challenge. You have a dilemma. But if you don't accept that, then maybe that dilemma disappears.
Look, a person cannot believe in Torah, and there's no contradiction. A person can deny Torah, there's no contradiction. A person can deny science, and there's no contradiction.
Right.
I accept Torah as being divine,
And you accept science.
and I also accept science. Science is constantly changing, but progressing. Example I always like to give, my father, Zichron Livracha, bought me a book, which was a compilation. Reader's Digest used to have, I am Joe's humerus, I am Jane's uterus, right? And it was great articles that would put into layman's terms all that goes on with the body. And this was a compilation. So you weren't reading one every month and one every other month. You were reading them all together. And it struck me because in one paragraph he would start off tongue-in-cheek and say, science used to think that I was a useless relic of evolution. However, now they know that the hypothalamus regulates all the hormonal flow in the body, and were it not for that, and right, we would be dead, right? Or we would be dwarfs, so right? And then, in the very next chapter, you hear him writing, this is just a useless relic of evolution. So when you're reading it one after another, it struck me, right, the same way that you've got your tongue in your cheek about what science used to think 50 years ago, don't you realize that 50 years from now, some will have their tongue in their cheek talking about what you thought, right? And we grew up with eat a lot of eggs, eat a lot of liver, right? Those are the healthiest things. Now they say, don't eat too many eggs. And liver, you really have to be careful how much liver, right? It's constantly adjusting. But at the same time, it's getting better all the time. Right? So for a person who accepts the validity of the divinity of Torah and the scientific process, then there is a contradiction. So one approach is the age a mature world was created. A second approach. If you look on page 2, verse 5. Vayikra Elokim la'or yom v'lachoshech kara layla. God called the light day, the darkness he called night. Vayihi erev. And there was Erev, Vayihi Boker, and there was Boker. Normally translated, there was evening and there was morning, Yom Echad, one day. Now, first of all, realize that according to the Torah's rendition over here, when did the sun and moon get up there?
Fourth day.
Day 4.
Yeah.
So what is Vayihi Erev Vayihi Boker? There was evening and there was morning. We associate evening and morning with sunrise, sunset, right? Sunset, sunrise, right? Songs backwards, what can we do? Okay, that's how we associate it. But there was not yet a sun and a sun that was in its position yet. Ramban says Vayihi Erev means it was mixture, it was confused, it was a mass. Vayihi Boker, there it was becoming identified, it was forming. So we're moving from chaos to order. That's how Ramban explains the words Vayihi Erev Vayihi Boker. It was a constant move from chaos to order. Now, what do the laws of science tell us? In an ungoverned system, do things continue to become more and more ordered or more and more chaotic?
Chaotic.
More and more chaotic. Now, the Medrash says, interestingly, Vayihi Erev, and it was evening. And, what's the and? It was evening, it was morning, and it was evening. The Medrash says that God was Borei Olamot Umachariv Olamot. This is an and. There was that which preceded. God was creating worlds and destroying worlds until we came to this present world that we are in. This was not the first go at it. It's not that God changed his mind. It's not that God made a mistake. It was a process of building, refining.
Now you know this is the final one.
We don't.
We don't know.
We don't. That is a good point. According to some of the Mekubalim, there are 7, and we're now in the 4th, which is and some say that we're in the 6th, right? Now, and it's very interesting because, again, this is what I read, I don't know this, right? But in geology, there are 4 distinct formations of stone that we find as we explore the earth, with upheaval and fossilized remains between them. Once we have that medrash, then, of course, there's going to be remnants of these earlier stages in the world. In fact, the Tiferes Yisrael, who is in the 1800s, who is one of the prime commentators on the Mishnah, when they discovered dinosaurs in the early 1800s, he was ecstatic. To him, it wasn't a challenge to his religious views. To him, they found evidence of the teaching that we have had for thousands of years, that this is not the first foray of the earth. There were many formations and destructions and formations and destructions that came before us. And now we're finding evidence of the Tyrannosaurus Rex and all these fantastic creatures that walked this planet that we have no connection to. And certainly in the Torah, we don't hear Vayihi Erev. And it was. There were other stages. There were other stages, phases of this world that preceded ours. And Tiferes Yisrael was ecstatic. And now we found evidence for that in the ground.
Rabbi?
Yeah.
You said those first 3 days there was no light. So I don't understand how the Ramban can say
Right.
can say that there was a 24-hour day the first 3 days.
We'll come to that soon. We're going to come to that soon. Now, to take this a step further, the Gemara says that there were 974 generations that preceded our world. 974, which is how many short of 1,000? 26. 26 is a big number. 26 is, right, I say we, but Ashkenazim, when we write a check, we try to give multiples of Chai, of 18. Sfardim, they give multiples of 26. Why 26? God's ineffable name, Yud K Vav K, Yud followed by a Hey, followed by a Vav and a Hey. That's 10, 5, 6, 5, 26. The gematria, the numerical value of God's name is 26. That's what they give. Right now, it raises the dues a bit. It's something to consider. I'm speaking to Basil about this. Something to consider. Okay? Now, when we say on Shabbos, we say one of the Tehillim, Ki Olam Chasto, Ki Olam Chasto. Hashem did this, Ki Olam Chasto, because His chesed is forever, because His kindness is forever. His kindness is forever. We say 26 times, His kindness is forever. That refers to the 26 generations until the Torah was given. There, it was because God's chesed, God's kindness. We were not, so to speak, earning it. We were not fulfilling the word of God and earning our keep here in this world. But it says there were 1,000 generations. So the Medrash says there were 974 generations that preceded ours. So again, working on this second approach.
Are you saying that preceded ours or preceded Adam?
Preceded Adam. Preceded Adam. Okay? Were they Neanderthals? Were they Tyrannosaurus Rex? Were they Brontosaurus? As I said on Shabbos, this is his name was free. I forget the guy's name exactly, but he told us about the Jewish dinosaur, the Oyagatsaurus. Right? What was it? I don't know what it was. Right? I don't know what these generations were, but the Gemara, again, talking about thousands of years ago, tells us that there were 974 generations. So there's this book, the Science, I forgot, I have it at home, a very interesting, Science Time Machine. He makes a very interesting calculation. Now, there's a pasuk in Tehillim which says, Ki elef shanim be'einecha ki yom etzmo. 1,000 years to us is like a day to God. See, he makes a mathematical calculation as follows. He says 974 generations. Let's say a generation is 40 years. 974 times 40. Right? That's how many years of those generations. How many days? Times 365. Now, our day is 1,000 years for God. Times 1,000. You getting this, Amy?
Yeah, I'm getting it.
What do you have?
14 billion.
365 times 1,000.
You have 974
Yeah.
times 40 times 365
Okay, I lost it.
Well,
times 1,000. It's about 15 billion.
15,000. There we go.
Yeah, it's about 15 billion. So, again, approach number 2 is we don't know what happened beforehand. We are told, and this is not apologetics. This is not they found the dinosaur and then we found the medrash. Right? This is the medrash that we've had, right, from the time of the Talmud. So there were stages beforehand. Okay? So, any dating is going back to the earlier stages, and that could very well be 16 billion. And it just so happens that if you work out, according to the Gemara, 974 generations, 40 years a generation, 365 days to a year, as the Pasuk says in Tehillim, 1,000 years is one day, you come out to 14, 15
where did
billion.
that number come from? 1,000 years for one day?
A Pasuk in Tehillim, in Psalms. King David wrote that.
It's like,
Okay.
Yeah.
So is that a,
when
That's
okay?
before the Talmud.
That's quite a conversion factor.
Yeah, that's before the Talmud.
So Rabbi,
Yes.
974 generation preceding
Adam.
And
but they are not called Adam or...
Correct. What are, like I said, are they Neanderthals? Brontosaurus.
All the above.
Oh yeah, I got Saurus. I don't know, right? But the Gemara talks about the 974 generations times 40 times 365 times 1,000 equals the range of 15 billion.
Right.
Okay, that is a second approach. There's a third approach, and this is Professor Schroeder, Gerald Schroeder, and he has a number of fantastic books, Genesis and the Big Bang. Besides Schroeder, everyone will tell you that we now understand that time does not run at the same flow everywhere.
Right.
That's the theory of a good Jewish boy of relativity.
Right.
Right? It's all relative. Depends where you are. So if the clock is put here on Earth, where we have a strong gravitational pull, it runs as it does. Time on the moon, where there's less of a gravitational pull, time will go faster. Put a clock on Jupiter, where the gravitational pull is that much greater than Earth, time will go even slower than Earth. So you can have a clock in different places. Time is relative. It's relative to its gravitational pull. It's also relative to the speed that one is traveling. If one is traveling at a faster speed, then time slows down. So the twins paradox is you put one of them onto a spaceship and have that fly close to the speed of light, and then it comes then and lands. Time is moving slower for there. The child on Earth will be older than his twin who just landed. They age at different points. Now, the example that he gives, that Professor Schroeder gives, is in this ever-expanding universe. Now, keep in mind, again, this is not Torah, this is just science. The universe is constantly expanding. Into what? Where is it expanding? Is there space out there that's expanding into there? No, there is no space. The space is the universe. So it is expanding. It is stretching out. As it stretches out, it's getting further and further. It's getting slower and slower. If you were to be at the middle point, and every minute, every second, you shoot out a flash of light. At the extreme, or some place out that some of the outer parts that are expanding, are you going to get it every second? No. Right? It's going to take that much longer and longer for you to get it. Right? These photons that are being sent out, right? It's going to be further and further and further. Here it's every second. There it's going to be who knows how long. Okay? They say the TSA agent stopped a photon. Right? Asked him if he has any luggage. He said, no, I'm traveling light. Okay. Okay, as it stretches out, what happens? Right? The time is slowing down. Actually, science has come up with the stretch. This is Professor Schroeder. What's exciting about the last few years in cosmology is now we have quantified the data to know the relationship of the view of time from the beginning relative to the view of time today. It's not science fiction any longer. Any one of a dozen physics textbooks all bring the same number. The general relation between time near the beginning, when stable matter formed from the light, the energy, the electromagnetic radiation of the creation, and time today is 1,000,000 million. That's the ratio of what time was then, or time is at the core, and time today. Right, 1,000,000 million is one with 12 zeros after it. So if I'm sending out a pulse every second, will we see it every second? No, he writes, we'd see it every million seconds. So Ramban had said that 6 days is 6 24-hour periods. Fair enough. But where is the clock for those 6 days? The clock is with God. The clock is at the very point of creation. Now, if science tells us that the ratio is 1,000,000 million, so one second becomes 1,000,000 million seconds. Now, 6 days is 6,000,000 million days, right? 6,000,000 million, right, divided by 365 comes out to approximately, Amy?
I got mixed up with the zeros.
Well, don't forget the zeros. Just do 6,000 divided by 365, and we'll add the zeros afterwards. Do 6,000 by 365.
6,000.
By 365, no, it's got to be somewhere about 1560.
There it is, it's 16.4.
16.4.
So there's
Right? So if the time ratio that science says, that physics says, is 1,000,000 million, so 6 days is 6,000,000 million days, equals what? 16 billion, which means, what does that mean? What is science telling us? If you're measuring time over here, you'll have 16 billion. If you're measuring time over here, what do you have? 6 days. Measuring time over here on Earth, 16 billion. Measuring time at the core, what do you have? 6 days. For the first 6 days, before Adam was created, where was this heavenly Torah clock? At the core. Once Adam was created, this world became the center. Right, that's why the sun goes around the earth. Just kidding, don't worry. Right? But this became the center of the purpose. And therefore, at that point, the clock is placed where? With Adam.
Who was the scientist that said this?
Professor Gerald Schroeder.
He's very interesting.
Right? Genesis and the Big Bang is one of his many books. So this third approach says, yes, Ramban is saying it was 24 hours. Where? That's where the clock was. But science tells us, comparing that core to where we are, the ratio is 12 zeros. Right? 1,000,000 million. Right? 1,000 million is a billion, so that becomes a trillion? I know. Gazillion, I don't know what it gets to. Right? 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 12 zeros. So that is a third approach to understanding 6 days, 16 billion years, and we're all in sync with one another. There are different truths, different ways of arriving at truth. And just before we get to Noach, we still have 10 minutes left for Noach. Don't want to leave Noach out completely. Yes?
Thank you.
That is that, first of all, masterful, number one.
I'm just reading very short, Professor Schroeder stuff.
Yeah, we
Number
do.
two, one thing that we always have to remember, science is based on theories. Theory after theory is discounted. So let us not accept, like Torah Misina, this newest theory, whatever it is, without saying, hold on, 25 years from now, 30 years from now, they're going to say, nah, that really wasn't right.
Yep.
We were wrong.
As
That
we've seen with the universe constantly.
Constantly.
Right.
So, as
But at the
opposed
same,
to
I'm with you, Debbie. But at the same time, but science is zeroing in.
Maybe
Right?
one day
They
they'll
veer
get it.
off. Yes. Right. And that's why. And that's why. Ultimately, when science gets it right and our understanding of Torah is completely right, there will be absolute convergence. We've seen a tremendous degree of convergence, right, until that point, until in our lifetimes.
Not sure if it's relevant, but when we see the lights at nighttime and the star come out, we see it at this moment, but that light actually have traveled millions.
That's right.
Right. That's chances are that star is no longer there.
Right.
Right. And the sun and the light that we see from the sun, actually it's 8 minutes old. That's what we see. It takes 8 minutes, I believe, or approximately 8 minutes for the light to, and those stars are no longer here. Right? Chances are the stars have already imploded, right? But their light is now first reaching us. Yeah, and that's Sonny, thank you. That's a perfect example of this time lapse that we think twinkle twinkle little star, but it's already of blessed memory when we're twinkling over, when we see the twinkles.
One of the things that I remember, we went out into a field to look at stars, and there were a number of scientists, religious scientists, and they said the light from these stars originated at the time of the Nevi'im, at the time of the prophets.
Wow.
And you get that sense of, I'm seeing the light that
Wow.
it is from thousands of years
Wow.
ago.
Wow.
That light. It's the most inspiring.
Right. That light saw the Beis
That's
Hamikdash.
right.
It was
That
before the
light-
Chorban, before
that's
the
right.
destruction of the temple.
That light saw it, yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's amazing.
Wow. That's heavy. Thank you.
And-
Yes.
And you know what? We have a hard time grasping, like, how could God have created the world in 6 days? But we also have a hard time grasping if there's like a natural disaster, like an earthquake or a tornado or something, or that tsunami. I mean, we could never create that. So, or even if a human could, it would take years and years and years, and for God it was like, it just happened in 1 second.
Yeah.
So if that can happen in 1 second, then so can what we have here. I mean, so it's not impossible for God to create the world in 6 days.
Yeah, I think Rav Nachman has a teaching.
know?
If you believe that you can destroy, here's a person needs to understand. If you believe that you can cause harm, then believe that you can build, that you can create. Right? So you're applying that, right? If we can see destruction in a moment, imagine the creation.
Well, the
Yeah.
power.
Yeah,
Power.
the
If
power.
God has that amount of
Yeah.
power to do that,
Yes.
then surely He has the same
Yes.
amount of power to do
Yes.
the other.
And just one other point I'd like to add. People say, I can't understand it. I want to understand. I want to understand God. Right? If we're believing in a God, then we are recognizing that there's no way that we can understand what this God is, what this God does, why this God does what He does, how He did what He did. There's no way. Can you explain the theory of relativity to a 2-year-old? Can't explain it to me, right? Forget about to a 2-year-old, right? I mean, there's certain things that we understand that are just beyond our grasp. We understand that a child at a certain point is just beyond their grasp. Right? I'm going to FaceTime with my 4-month-old granddaughter and have a conversation with her.
Of course.
Right? Obviously, there's not going to be all that much understanding. So, if you compare the difference between her understanding and my understanding, that is infinitesimal compared to the difference between my understanding and God's understanding. So why do we expect to be able to understand everything and this all makes sense to me?
Rabbi,
Now we have to try. We have to try. But we have to also realize that the limitations are ours. Yeah,
that
Steve.
that seems to me the arrogance of science, that it does say that we will eventually find it, and that by exploring the material world, we'll basically disprove that there could have been a non-material beginning to this.
Okay.
Yes,
Well, yes. Look, often there is an arrogance in science. That was the scientist's lucky guess, that the Jews had the same number. But it's also important to realize, right, if you want to prove God's existence, so science uses physical means. But I'm going to give you a tape measure, right, to measure the percentage of oxygen in the air. Right? You can't use a tape measure to... Now, I don't see any oxygen, so obviously I've proven, my tape measure has proven that there's no oxygen in the air. But obviously you can't measure oxygen concentration with a tape measure. So science is using physical, when it comes to not the universe, which is physical, when it comes to God, we try to use mathematical, right? 2 + 5 = green. You can't use different means of measuring for concepts that are completely in a different realm than that. 2 + 3 = 5. 2 + 4 does not equal green or a chair. Right? So, it doesn't add up. Right? So, when it comes to the universe, when it comes to the physical world, science, right, is making fantastic steps, and we'll see the convergence. When science says, let's prove God's existence, that's let's measure the oxygen with my tape measure. Right? And clearly we're flailing and not going to get anywhere. But it's not because there's no oxygen in the air. It's because we have no means, or we have no. A tape measure is not a means through which that can be measured. Yes.
It seems to me that science, learning more, looking more, researching more, even though what comes out of it will be outdated, every time a scientist or a human being looks at the world and in relationship to God, what they're really measuring, or what they're really increasing, is an appreciation and awe of the wonder. And I think that's the important thing, the wonder of God.
Yeah.
And we've come to a certain extent, now that we talk about billions and all that, which is overwhelming, how much more awesome is God's universe that we can speak about it.
Yeah.
Like that.
Yeah. No, that's what I said before.
So the measure
it is awe-inspiring.
Yes, so the measure is not the microbes. It's not that, it only appears that way. The measure is the increase in appreciation and awe.
And awe. Yeah, I think key word is awe.
Awe.
Let's do a little bit of Noach. So Noach is told, Noach Ish Tzaddik, page 30. And Hashem tells Noach, Vatishachet ha'aretz afnei Elokim, the land was in a destroyed state, and Hashem is going to bring destruction. What destruction is he going to bring? The flood. Rashi brings the famous medrash. Why specifically the flood? Because that would force Noach to build an ark. And for 120 years, Noach is building this ark. Why was it better to have Noach building an ark? In order that get the attention of the other people around, and they will do teshuvah. Did it work?
Oh, no.
No. They say that Noach was the least successful kiruv practitioner in the history of mankind.
Oh.
Right? Who came along? His wife. his 3 sons, and their wives. That's it. No one else signed up. So my question is, then the first question returns. So why did God choose this method?
Because he was a tzaddik. It says he was a tzaddik.
No, I understand. Noach was saying he was a tzaddik. But the reason why we had the flood, and the reason why we had him building 120 years was in order to get others. Rashi says, there are many ways of saving. Why did he bother him to build this ark? In order that people's generation would see, and they see him working 120 years. They're asking, hey, Noah, what are you doing? And he says, God's bringing a flood, right? Maybe they'll do teshuvah. They didn't. They scoffed at him. Right? He was the last 3 segments of the 6 o'clock news. And now we go back to Noah. Noah, what you doing? Doing all right. What you doing? Building an ark. Why are you building an ark? Big flood coming. How long have you been working on it? 50 years. How much longer you got? Oh, about another 100, another 70. Okay. And good night, everybody. We'll see you tomorrow at the 6 o'clock news. Right? Everybody kept panning back to Noah every couple of weeks. Right? They were scoffing at him. So if it was completely futile, so why did God do it in such a way?
Free will.
Free will meaning what?
Meaning they had a chance to make a decision.
Okay, right? We could certainly say they need. Right? God knows what we're going to do. So why are we born? Why are we born? Why have a nisayon? Why have a challenge? Come to this with Avram. Why have a challenge? Why have a challenge, a test? God knows what we're going to do. Right? Well, we need to go through it. We are changed as a result of that. It's not I know what I'm going to do. Right? I know that if I work out, I'll lose some weight and I'll get a lot stronger. I know that. Very good. But unless I actually do it, I stay the same. It's the experiences that we go through that change us and make us who we are. So they needed to experience it. They needed to experience this opportunity. Yeah, and Noah, Dov, you trying to say something?
I was going to say that, okay, can you get to the people, but maybe get to the animals?
I wouldn't go along that, because our understanding is the free-willed, moral decision-making beings are humanity. Right? And if humanity is acting correctly, then the world will continue. Everything else is here for us to use as vehicles for us to become more godly. Right?
Well,
through
Hashem,
kindness, etc.
Right. But Hashem's saying, these guys, you're going to have a better chance with the animals.
Okay. Perhaps also it could be for Noah. Noah needs to know that you keep trying. You keep trying. It might be futile. In the end, God might have known God knew it would be futile. Noah didn't know. And there are times that what we're doing might be futile. What we're trying to do for others might be futile. It might almost be a slam dunk that'll be futile. But nevertheless, we need to keep on going. Keep on trying. This is the olam ha'asiyah. This is the world of doing. What will result from our doing? God knows. We don't know. Therefore, we've got to keep on going. Keep on building. 120 years. Okay. That's what we got to do. And we'll end with this. Just a lesson that I always try to walk away from Noah is God spoke to him and said to him, right, page 30, verse 13, God said to Noah, the end of all flesh come before me, earth is filled with robbery, I'm going to destroy the earth, make yourself an ark of gopher wood, make the ark compartments, etc., etc., etc. And then, right, as for me, page 33, saying, I'm going to bring the flood waters. As for you, take care of yourself, 21, food, eat and gather all the animals. And Noah did all God commanded him. Chapter 7, then Hashem said to Noah, come to the ark. right? There was 120 years that passed between chapter 6, verse 21, and chapter 7, verse 1. Right? By us, the Balkore, the reader, basically takes a breath and then reads the next pasuk. Right? But actually it was 120 years. Right? People think that I talk for too long. It was 120 years, right, that was waiting in between over here. But Noah kept on going. 120 years of scorn, of derision, of the 6 o'clock news. 120 years of not hearing anything further from God. But he keeps on going. He keeps on going. And we too, we have our inspiration, and then we keep on going, even though we have our times of not such inspiration. But we keep on going. Allie.
So I think God speaks to us all the time. So maybe not as clearly as he spoke to Noah, and maybe not in the same clear details of what we need to do. But if we see and appreciate the gifts he's giving us, which may be challenges that are our gifts, and we're able to see those and acknowledge that those are God speaking to us through whatever these life events are that are going on, then I think, just as Noah, we need to just continue to grow through them and enjoy those blessings. And,
Yep.
and I think as you spoke about time, it made me think how there's times in our life when we feel like it's going really fast. And that's usually when things are actually really good and we're really happy. And sometimes it seems like it's really slow or dragging when you're dealing with something that's harder. So there's that element of time, but I think that God does speak to us. We just have to see it.
Nice. Nice. My friends will call it over here. Yes. Yes, Linda.
I was just going to say that.
I just want to dismiss the class feeling to go. Should be like walking out in the middle.
The finding of Isaac as such a magnificent thing done because God said to. This man gave 120 years of his neighbors making fun of him and everything else. That's a pretty impressive thing.
Sometimes it's easier to have that flash of glory than to have the day-to-day grind.
That's true. That's true.
Yeah.
That's true.
600 years old, Rabbi.
Thank you.
Thank you, Rabbi.
Noah was 600 years old.
Thank you.